as the author.
Right. And you know, it's interesting. You mentioned when it comes to the identity of Jesus, how often in other gospels as well, Jesus, the messianic secret. So here's Jesus who gets revealed, you know, it's whether he, a demon is saying, we know who you are, or whether that's Jesus does a miracle and then tells someone, or sorry, the demon says, we know who you are. And then he says, be quiet. Or when he heals someone and then Jesus says, don't tell anyone about this. I know a lot of times, especially when we were reading through the Gospel of John, people were writing in and saying, why doesn't Jesus want people to know who he is? Why does he want to hide from this identity? What's one of the answers that you oftentimes will give people when they run into that messianic secret?
Yeah, well, it's so funny you mention that, because when I read that years ago, I always thought it was reverse psychology. You know, he was saying, don't tell anybody about this, knowing they're going to open their mouth, you know.
Not every day a boy gets to whitewash a fence, you know, that kind of thing. Little Tom Sawyer.
Right. But I think that one of the reasons is that there's a timing to everything in Jesus' life, and that he is revealing himself first to his disciples and to those around them, and laying the foundation down as to who he was. And there is a time. There's a time for everything in his life. And the real proclamation of his kingdom and who he was through the disciples, but that would come after the resurrection. That would be premature to suddenly the Romans and everybody else to say, hey, this guy is really a great king, like the Maccabean revolt or David, you know, and to establish him as a king, renewing the kingdom that had kind of gone silent for years. And his kingdom was not like that. And his kingdom was different, the kingdom of heaven. And so it was all in the timing, I believe, of that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, Cardinal Newman at one point, he asked the question, how come Jesus didn't just appear to everyone after he rose from the dead? And why did he only appear to his disciples? And his answer is kind of similar to that, where he said the idea wasn't just so that people could see him. The idea was that the people who knew him could see him. The people who had a relationship with him could see him, because then they could go and bear witness to him, as opposed to the fickle crowds, as opposed to those who had no investment whatsoever in him, who would say, yeah, sure, I saw this man raised from the dead, but that doesn't change my life at all. He said it is a lot, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but that sense of here's this relationship, and out of this relationship comes a witness, bearing witness to his identity, not just himself and not just his miracles, and obviously not the demons, but these apostles who are sent out, who are no longer servants, but are friends, who then get sent out into the world to not just bear witness to his miracles, not just bear witness to his resurrection, but bear witness to the one they know, the one they're in relationship with. And yeah, that makes sense. You have to, as you said, we just finished the book of Ecclesiastes, and there's a season for everything, and this was not the season to be revealed. Yet there's yet time for growth.
And it speaks to, I think, the fact that he's in control of the narrative. He is not allowing the public narrative to define his kingdom or when he should rise or what he should do. He is in control of that. And you and I are both Mac fans. I mean, we use Macintosh. We have for years. A lot of people have iPhones. And if you think back for a moment, when Steve Jobs was developing all of that, you know, the Mac computer and the iPads, all of that, he was very, very careful to tell those around him, do not let this out yet. Do not let it out, on pain of firing, right?
Right.
And so Apple had this unique environment where nobody leaked things out ahead of time, because there was a time to do it. Now, I'm not equating the kingdom of heaven with Steve Jobs and Apple, but it's the same type of thing. And that is that I am speaking to you as a small group here in the development of everything that I am giving you, and there will be a time. And I know that your natural inclination is to start to record me and sell the tapes and everything else. I know that, but I don't want you doing that right now. And so I think it's an incredible thing, because, you know, Solomon was known as the builder in the Old Testament. Jesus is greater than Solomon. He is the master builder. And I think part of the master builder aspect is prudence on when and how the kingdom grows. And I think that just to make a note here, I do think the kingdom of heaven is better than apples. So
just as a sidebar, asterisk.
just a sidebar.
Quick, one thing about the authorship of Mark's gospel. Here's Mark, who I think I've come across many people who have said that it is highly likely that as Mark and Peter were close, Mark had traveled with Paul and Barnabas, and that whole story, how that story went down. But then Mark and Peter were close. That this would be Peter's gospel via Mark. Is that important? Is that unique to highlight, or is that kind of like just a fact or a piece of trivia?
Well, I've read that quite a few times where people talk about that idea, and it certainly could be. I mean, a lot of the themes that he brings about are relating to those which Peter is interested in, for sure. But I think that the real emphasis is on the identity of Jesus and the mission of Jesus. But no doubt, Mark learned from Peter, and it could be through his eyes as well. A lot of the formation of Mark is different than the other Gospels, where there is an immediacy to what he is telling you. In fact, what's interesting about this Gospel is that he uses 41 times the word immediately. And so he's always talking about immediately, and it's an average of 2 times per chapter.
Yeah, it's only 16 chapters.
So. Yeah, he's using it a lot for such a short book, and it really gives us, I think, a sense of a kind of a rapid fire narrative. And so people who say, well, I didn't like Mark because it's not as expansive as Luke and Matthew. Right. Well, this could be that rapid fire look at the gospel. Another thing that's very interesting is the organization of the material in Mark. And what I mean by that is that Mark has a tendency, I should say, to organize the gospel by a type of material. So we have miracles, and you have parables, you have controversies, and it's not so much thematic like faith and that type of thing, like you would expect. And it's important for the reader to realize that the material is organized. It's not just a random telling, but he really is organizing it. But the one thing, Father, that I like about Mark, and when I teach this, I'm always using Mark to do this, and you can use the other Gospels as well, and that is that Mark utilizes in a masterful way Jesus' ability to use questions when he teaches. And Jesus uses over 10 different ways